In 1975, a harmless night of mischief in a Connecticut suburb turns tragic.
It was about noon when the doorbell rang. It was the girl who lives behind our house. And she said she had found Martha.
The unsolved murder of Martha Moxley heats up when rumors of a cover-up surface. And the accused, who hails from American royalty, changes his story.
The whole family, they really felt they could get away with things that ordinary people can't get away with.
In the trial of Michael Skakel. Bellhaven, Connecticut is an exclusive suburb of New York City, where in 1974 the Moxley family relocate from California. David Moxley is a partner of an international accounting firm in New York City. The family is thrilled with their new home.
It was wonderful. I mean, people greeted us with open arms. We bought this old house, as I said, that needed a lot of tender love and care, and immediately we were attacking the parts of it that needed it the most.
The Moxley's teenage children, John and Martha, are quick to make new friends.
In 1975, I was 17, Martha was 15. Everything in Bellhaven was unique at the time. It was a new place. It's a beautiful place. There were friendly people.
Martha is popular at school. Her braces have just been removed, and she's getting interested in boys. And as luck would have it, next door is a family with 6 brothers. They're the children of Rushton Skakel, whose sister Ethel was married to Senator Robert F. Kennedy, a member of one of the most powerful political families in America. Martha is drawn to 17-year-old Thomas Skakel. Thomas also likes Martha. But she's not impressed with Thomas's younger brother, 15-year-old Michael, who has a poor attendance record at school.
Michael had some learning problems, I understand, which are difficult to deal with, but Michael's parents had all the means to deal with all of these things.
Michael and his brothers are being raised by his widowed father.
The father was an alcoholic. Their mother had died. They had no supervision. They were like a tribe of wild Indians over there.
Michael is known locally as a troubled teenager and is frequently seen around Bellhaven brandishing a golf club. Martha sees a lot of the Skakel boys and notes Michael's erratic behavior in her diary.
I really have to stop going over there. Michael was being such an ass. They all started fighting because he was being such a big he-man.
October 30th, 1975. Halloween approaches. Teenagers in Bellhaven play pranks on their neighbors as younger children play trick-or-treat.
Trick-or-treat!
The kids pelt cars, houses, and even people with wet toilet paper or eggs. On this particular night, Martha Moxley is late coming home.
She was out and she didn't come home, and I thought, well, you know, she is testing this a little bit lately because she was getting older. And I thought, well, you know, I'll just not panic, I'll just wait a little bit.
Dorothy has to wait through the night and into the next morning before she hears any news of her daughter Martha.
It was about noon when the doorbell rang. It was the girl who lives behind our house. And she said she had found Martha. And I said, well, is she all right? And she said, no. At that point, my one friend, Jean Walker, said, I'll go. You stay here, I'll go. And I said, okay, I will stay in the house. And so she went, and then she came back in the house a couple of minutes later and said that, yes, it was Martha, and that she was dead.
The police are called. They find Martha's lifeless body under a tree on property that borders the Moxley and Skakel houses. Her skull had been smashed, leaving her blonde hair matted with dried blood. She'd also been stabbed in the neck with a sharp instrument. Her jeans and underwear were pulled down, and the inside of her thighs are smeared with blood, suggesting the killer tried to force her legs apart. But she had not been raped. The police in Bellhaven estimate the time of death at around 10 p.m. the night before. Nearby, they find parts of what they think is the murder weapon, a golf club, which has been broken into 4 pieces. 3 are recovered, but the 4th piece, the handle, is missing. When investigators start asking questions, it's revealed that Martha had been with some of the Skakel boys on the night she died. So they pay the family a visit, and almost right away, notice something important.
They found a golf club that matched the murder weapon inside the Skakel house the day that Martha's body was found. And instead of beginning a formal search of the house, getting a search warrant and going through everything, they didn't do that.
Police questioned Thomas and Michael Skakel, who admit they were with Martha the night she died. They said they'd been listening to music with her and some other friends in their eldest brother's car. The 2 boys immediately become suspects until they both provide alibis. Michael tells the police that at around 9:30 p.m., his older brothers, Rushton Jr. and John, ordered everyone except him out of the car. Next, he says his older brothers drove him 20 miles to watch a movie at his cousin's house. He says he didn't head home until 11:30 p.m. and then went straight to bed. Both his brothers and his cousin corroborate his story. Thomas says that after Michael drove to his cousin's, he and Martha were left alone together.
He was fooling around with Martha. They were maybe kissing or something of that nature in the driveway.
Thomas says afterwards he went back to his house to work on a school assignment, and that Martha went home too.
He was the last person observed with Martha before she was found dead the next morning.
Both Thomas and Michael pass polygraph tests, and their alibis check out, so they're ruled out as suspects. Over the coming months, the police pursue dozens of leads, but none pan out. The case goes cold. Then 16 years later, in 1991, a chance event rekindles interest in the case. Another member of the Kennedy family, William Kennedy Smith, makes the news.
William Kennedy Smith was arrested for a rape charge, in Florida. And there was a story that mistakenly said he was at the Skakel house that night, the night of Martha Moxley's murder. He was not. But that led to the state of Connecticut reopening the investigation.
William Kennedy Smith is acquitted of rape, and it's formally established he was nowhere near the Skakel's house in 1975. Regardless, public interest in the Moxley case is reawakened, and the state prosecutor's office hires retired detective Frank Garr to give it another look. With the media spotlight back on the Skakel family, Michael Skakel's father, Rushton, decides he must prove once and for all that his children had nothing to do with the murder of Martha Moxley.
A group of private investigators had been hired by the Skakel family to purportedly participate in the reinvestigation of the case. Some of their investigation was leaked.
The investigator's report lands on Frank Gar's desk. It contains a new interview with Michael Skakel that stuns Gar. Because Michael had changed his story. Back in 1975, he told police he'd come back from his cousin's house at 11:30 p.m. on October the 30th and gone straight to bed.
His later story was that he goes out again at 12 o'clock. He goes to Martha's house. He masturbates by a tree. He calls Martha's name, then he hears noises, and he runs home again.
Frank Gar is suspicious.
Why would Michael volunteer that kind of information unless it was to protect himself? Why would he put himself at the murder scene when he wasn't a suspect?
News of Michael's strange account is also leaked to journalist Len Levitt, who now teams up with Frank Gar to work the case. But it's not until 4 years later that Connecticut State Prosecutor Jonathan Benedict believes he's got enough evidence to bring charges.
I became increasingly convinced that we had a real case. So I went from being leery to getting pretty enthusiastic pretty quickly.
On January the 19th, 2000, Michael Skakel is indicted for the murder of Martha Moxley. For the Moxley family, it's an event they never thought would happen.
When I became involved with this case and first met Dorothy Moxley, I mean, just the idea that they would make an arrest, just the idea that there would be an indictment was far from her mind and far from my mind. It was a hope, a dream.
The trial of Michael Skakel begins at Norwalk Superior Court, Connecticut. With the Kennedy on trial, a media frenzy is guaranteed. But for the Moxley family, Michael Skakel isn't a celebrity. He's a killer.
Yeah, it was an out-of-body experience. I felt like, you know, you were sitting outside of yourself, looking at yourself, like so many TV shows or something, listening, and the unreal part about it was all about your family.
I mean, it could turn out one way or the other. And so you just have to, you know, keep your prayers going, and you have to have faith.
Jonathan Benedict begins his prosecution by exploring Michael Skakel's change of story. He reminds the jury that in 1975, Skakel's alibi was that he was 20 miles away watching a movie, after which he returned home and went to bed. But in 1996, Skakel told his father's private investigators that after arriving home at 11:30, he went back outside, masturbated by a tree near the Moxley house, and then ran home.
Why would he change his story? After all these years, why would he change the story?
Benedict puts forward a theory to explain Skakel's new account of his movements. In the years since the murder, crime scene DNA analysis had progressed dramatically. Benedict argues that Skakel realized that should any of his DNA be identified at the crime scene, he needed to have an explanation for why he was there. Benedict suggests that the story about masturbating near Martha Moxley's house was an invention. Having argued that Skakel's account of his movements was a lie, Benedict attacks his alibi. Benedict produces a witness, Andrea Shakespeare Renner, who's a friend of Skakel's sister, Julie. She was at the Skakel's house on October the 30th, and she says she walked home with Julie Skakel at around 9:30 p.m., the same time Michael says he and his brothers were driving to his cousin's. Then Andrea delivers the bombshell that she saw Michael in his house after the car had left.
Michael Skakel never went to his cousins as he had claimed. A friend of his sister's pointed out that after Michael had claimed to have gone to his cousins, she had seen him inside the Skakel house.
If Shakespeare Renner is right, then Michael Skakel's alibi simply can't be true. Next, Jonathan Benedict produces several witnesses who claim Skakel made a series of confessions to them. Tracked down by ex-cop Frank Garr and journalist Len Levitt, they are all alumni of a private school in Maine that Skakel also attended. Key testimony comes from former classmate Gregory Coleman, seen here at a pre-trial hearing. He dies before Skakel's trial, but the prosecution offers his statement as evidence. He claims that the first words Skakel ever said to him were, "I'm a Kennedy, and I'm going to get away with murder." He also says Skakel admitted that he drove in the skull of Martha Moxley because she spurned his advances, and he hit her so hard that the golf club broke in half. Now it's the defense's turn. Despite Skakel's alleged confessions, his attorney, Mickey Sherman, dismisses Benedict's evidence as entirely circumstantial. He argues Michael didn't tell the masturbation story when first questioned in 1975, simply because he was too embarrassed. He reminds the jury that there's no forensic evidence of any kind linking his client to the crime. No blood, no semen, no DNA, and he claims Skakel had no motive. Finally, he reiterates that Skakel was nowhere near the scene of the crime. Brothers John and Rushton Jr. and Skakel's cousin all testify Michael was with them that night, 20 miles away, watching a movie. In his closing argument, Sherman is buoyant, calling the prosecution's case a conspiracy.
He began his summation by saying, and I'm going to quote it just like this because I never forgot it. He started off and he said, he didn't do it. He was almost glib.
But Jonathan Benedict gets the final word. In his closing argument, he pulls everything together.
My point then in closing was to bring all those facts that I laid out in my opening home and relate them to another. This is true because that is true. That is true because this is true. Everything ties in with everything.
Benedict paints a picture of what he thinks happened on October the 30th, 1975. It began, as Michael Skakel said it did, with him, Martha, Thomas, and some friends listening to music in the Skakel car. At around 9:30 p.m., Thomas and Martha leave the car and make out on the property near the Skakel house. But from now on, Benedict says, the sequence of events was very different to Michael Skakel's version. He suggests that rather than drive with his brothers to his cousin's to watch a movie, Michael got out of the car, went to his room, and spied on his brother and the girl he had a crush on, Martha Moxley. Thomas and Martha went their separate ways at around 10. Michael ran after Martha and confronted her. She pushed him away. In a fit of rage, he struck her with his golf club, again and again. With such ferocity, the club broke into 4 pieces.
Police call that overkill, gratuitous violence. And usually it bespeaks of personal rage.
Still holding the handle of the golf club, Skakel drove it through her neck. Realizing what he'd done, he ran home, cleaned his blood-stained clothes, and tried to sleep. But none of this can be true if Skakel's alibi was genuine. So Benedict saves his best for last. Skakel's alibi is that at the time of the murder, he was 20 miles away at his cousin's house. Benedict reminds the jury of the testimony of Julie Skakel's friend Andrea Shakespeare Renner, and how she said she'd seen Michael Skakel at the house after his brother's car had driven away. Benedict then produces a tape of an interview Skakel had given in 1997 to a would-be biographer. He plays part of that tape to the court. In it, Skakel restated his alibi and detailed his movements on the night of October the 30th, 1975. How he and his older brothers had left for his cousins at around 9:30 and returned home at 11:30. Then critically, he added that he remembered his sister Julie had walked Andrea Shakespeare Renner home that night. Andrea had already testified that at around 9:30 p.m., she saw Michael in or near his home after the car had left for his cousins. But this is the same time at which Skakel said he was in that car with his older brothers. If the jury believes Andrea Shakespeare Renner's account, Michael Skakel has just destroyed his own alibi. He wasn't on his way to his cousins, but in or near his own house around the time of the murder. In court, there are collective gasps of understanding.
The killer blow in the trial was Jonathan Benedict's summation, where he presented a scenario that convinced the jurors that Michael Skakel never went to his cousins as he had claimed. It was impossible to disprove. He did a brilliant job. The only way you could have disproved it was to have attacked the testimony of the neighbor and saying, you know, you made a mistake. As I recall, Skakel's attorney, Mickey Sherman, made an attempt, but it was a half-hearted attempt.
On June the 7th, 2002, the jury deliver their verdict in the case against Michael Skakel. A generation after the death of Martha Moxley, he's found guilty of her murder. Michael Skakel is sentenced to 20 years to life.
Again today, like we've been doing like I've been doing for 27 years, I'm praying that I can find justice for Martha. You know, this whole thing was about Martha. My statement to the press was, this was Martha's day. I mean, it was justice for Martha. I mean, she's still gone, but it was justice. I really, I think when you do something that terrible, you should be punished. So, I feel this is fair and just.
Still, Skakel's attorney, Mickey Sherman, is determined to fight on.
Let me make a few comments. Yes, we are bitterly disappointed. There's no way to hide it. This is certainly the most upsetting verdict I've ever had or will ever have in my life. But I will tell you, as long as there's a breath in my body, this case is not over as far as I'm concerned.
Since his conviction, Michael Skakel has lost 2 appeals. He'll be eligible for parole in April 2013.
I think he's a very troubled person to this day. I think he was very troubled then. It's pretty clear that he hasn't been able to come to peace with it yet. And that's too bad, but it's understandable.
For Martha Moxley's family, although justice was ultimately done, nothing can replace their loss.
She's never coming back. The potential of what she might have been will never be realized. The relationships with nieces and nephews, in-laws and outlaws, the life experiences will never be shared. So, you know, it's one of those things where you just, you go on because you have to.
There's no such thing as closure, and that's a crummy word, but you learn how to live with it.
November 2007, Perugia, Italy. A 21-year-old British student, Meredith Kercher, was sexually assaulted and stabbed to death.
It's not ever going to be the same without Mez.
Could Meredith's own housemate, Amanda Knox, be one of those to blame for her brutal murder? Was it the result of a sex game that went terribly wrong?
E lì penso che abbiano perso un po' la testa.
But it's not an open and shut case.
The motive wasn't there. The evidence that Amanda was in the room wasn't there.
It will take 4 years and 3 sensational trials to reach a dramatic conclusion. And in the end, was justice done?
It was too much about Amanda and not enough about Meredith.
The city of Perugia lies in the beautiful Umbrian hills in the heart of Italy. It's famous for its historic buildings and its ancient university. For the parents of 21-year-old British student Meredith Kercher, it seemed the perfect place for their daughter to spend a year as part of her degree. Meredith embraces life in Italy.
Penso che la caratteristica principale di Meredith fosse proprio la voglia di vivere, la voglia di conoscere.
She quickly makes friends, and in September 2007 decides to rent a cottage with 2 Italian students. The pretty former farmhouse is just a few minutes' walk from her university. 2 weeks later, Meredith and her housemates are joined by an American. Her name is Amanda Knox.
I think at the first they were bonded because of their language. Amanda also had worked her way to get to Perugia. She was quirky, free-spirited, from Seattle, which is a very alternative city.
To make her feel welcome, Meredith invites Amanda to join her and her friends when they go out.
They had a number of activities together, from visiting exhibition, going out at night, having a pizza together.
But soon the 2 girls realize how different they are, and friction develops.
As the weeks went on, they started to realize how culturally different they were, and tension had started to build in the house.
Sicuramente le amiche inglesi di Meredith hanno detto che c'era della tensione fra le 2 ragazze, che quindi non fossero così vicine fra di loro perché Amanda non era molto precisa nella gestione della casa.
Meredith complains to her friends and family about her habit of leaving the toilet unflushed. She is irritated by what she considers Amanda's exhibitionism, performing yoga at inappropriate moments and talking about her sex life. Above all, Meredith disapproves of the Americans' penchant for bringing men home to the cottage. Then, a month after her arrival in Perugia, Amanda meets a 23-year-old Italian computer science student, Raffaele Sollecito.
He was a smart and shy student from a very good family. He had not had many serious girlfriends. Amanda, I think, was one of his first, and they seemed very much in that early stage of being lovebirds.
Meredith and Amanda's friendship had cooled. On Wednesday, October the 31st, Meredith attends a Halloween party with friends. But according to Amanda, she texts Meredith that evening, suggesting they meet up.
They had an exchange of SMS with the mobiles, Where are you going? Which disco Halloween night are you going to go? I'm going to see you. XXX, I love you.
Meredith doesn't reply to Amanda's invitation. 24 hours later, she is brutally murdered. On the 2nd of November, Meredith's body is discovered by her housemate Filomena, her boyfriend, and Amanda and Raffaele.
She had several large knife wounds in her neck. The one very deep and fatal knife wound eventually resulted in her drowning in her own blood. Her bra had been cut off and her t-shirt had been rolled up and she was partially nude.
For the Kercher family, news that their daughter has been murdered is devastating.
Il loro sentimento fu veramente di tragedia e poi si è trasformato in un desiderio di capire, di conoscere soprattutto il motivo per cui è successo tutto questo.
For police in Perugia, the crime is unprecedented. There is intense pressure to solve the case as quickly as possible.
The window had been broken and things strewn around. It made investigators immediately think, perhaps this is a break-in and a sexual assault. But the more they investigated, the more they started to have doubts.
The police questioned Meredith's housemates about their whereabouts on the evening of the murder. All had stayed elsewhere that night and produced alibis. Amanda Knox tells police she spent the previous night of the 1st of November with her boyfriend, Raffaele Sollecito, at his apartment, a short walk from the cottage. She says that between 10 and 11 the next morning, she had returned to the cottage and had noticed a couple of strange things. The front door was open, while Meredith's bedroom door was shut. She claims to have seen blood on the floor in the bathroom and on the sink taps. Yet she went ahead and had a shower. She says that later, at Raffaele's apartment, she'd casually mentioned what she'd seen. Together, they'd returned to the cottage, where they'd discovered glass from a broken window on a pile of clothes in housemate Filomena's room. Amanda called Filomena, who headed back to the cottage, and then the police. Filomena's boyfriend had broken down Meredith's door and discovered her body. But the following day, back at the crime scene, police become suspicious. They can't help but notice the couple's odd behavior.
They found Amanda and Raffaele kissing and cuddling, and that continued at the police station as they were waiting for the questioning. They were kissing and making faces and didn't seem to be grieving.
Police questioned Raffaele Sollecito and then Amanda Knox throughout the night of the 5th and into the early hours of the 6th of November. They are particularly interested in Amanda's communications on the night of the murder with a Congolese man, Patrick Lumumba, the owner of a bar where she had been working part-time.
They'd seen text messages between her and Patrick Lumumba saying, "See you later."
For police, the texts raise suspicions further. Then, Amanda dramatically changes her story. Having already stated she wasn't in the house at the time of the murder, according to police, she now says she was. She even says she heard Meredith being attacked. And she names the assailant as Patrick Lumumba, though the circumstances of the statement are controversial.
At a certain point, and she claims it was after she'd been really intensely questioned and even cuffed on the back of the head, which police deny, she said, It was him. I remember it was him. The police officers describe her describing Lumumba, saying she had gone to the kitchen and put her hands on her ears like this to sort of block out Meredith's screams.
Police call in the prosecutor, and Amanda repeats her statement. By the next morning, police think they have a witness and a potential suspect.
About 9 a.m., she asked investigators for a piece of paper and a pen and wrote down the story again.
But in her written account, Amanda is less specific. She admits to having smoked marijuana with Raffaele the night of the murder and believes it's affected her memory. She again says she heard Meredith screaming, but her memory of seeing Patrick is hazy. On the basis of this evidence, Amanda Knox, Raffaele Sollecito, and the bar owner Patrick Lumumba are arrested and held in custody. But 2 weeks later, a witness comes forward who proves that Patrick Lumumba was in his bar at the time of the murder. What's more, DNA from Meredith's body and the crime scene doesn't match Lumumba's. Instead, the DNA is traced to Rudy Gede, a 20-year-old petty criminal, originally from the Ivory Coast.
They found his footprints, they had his palm print, they realized this was a guy they needed to talk to. They put out an Interpol alert for him and discovered that he had fled to Germany.
Authorities apprehend Gede and extradite him back to Italy. The police and prosecutor are left to question Amanda Knox's credibility, given she'd implicated an innocent man. They now believe that the evidence points to Sollecito, Knox, and Gede all being involved in the murder of Meredith Kercher. And they discover Gede and Knox know each other. They learn that both Amanda and Meredith had been introduced to him by some of their housemates.
They were not close friends, but they had had social encounters at a pub, at a party, at the downstairs flat.
Aveva incontrato Amanda Knox 2 o 3 volte, aveva espresso il suo gradimento per Amanda Knox.
The Italian prosecutor feels there is enough evidence to bring the three to trial. On the 20th of November, nearly 3 weeks after the murder, Rudy Gede admits to being in the house when Meredith was killed. He elects for a fast-track trial, and in October 2008 is tried in a closed court, attended by both Amanda and Raffaele. On the stand, Gede insists he didn't kill Meredith. Instead, he implicates an unidentified Italian man. But it's a story he will continue to change. On the basis of DNA linking him to the crime, Gede is found guilty of sexual assault and murder and sentenced to 30 years. Amanda and Raffaele had hoped his trial would exonerate them. But on the evidence put before them, the Italian courts have been convinced Gede acted with others. On January the 16th, 2009, after more than 14 months in jail, the pair are brought to trial in Perugia's historic courthouse. When the trial starts, the Kercher family joins the international press packed inside the vaulted Hall of Frescoes. During the trial, the Kercher family are called to testify on behalf of Meredith.
It was heartbreaking to hear Arlene Kercher on the stand, and John Kercher. Arlene talking about how you never expect when you send a child off to school that they'll never come home. The Kercher family was very dignified.
Amanda's demeanor, on the other hand, seems inappropriate.
She was very open and gregarious. She was smiling and laughing. She wore these t-shirts that said, "All you need is love," and it wasn't working in her favor.
Amanda has become a figure of obsession for the press. They've dubbed her Foxy Knoxy, which was actually a nickname from her childhood soccer playing days, and cast her as a femme fatale. Now it's her testimony that falls under scrutiny. The verbal statement she made to the police that she'd been at the house on the fateful night are deemed inadmissible in court because there wasn't an attorney present. It's also revealed that the interviews weren't taped.
Arriving in the police office, I didn't expect to be interrogated at all.
Her written statement, in which she refers to her confused and hazy recollection of events, is admitted. On the stand, Amanda now reverts to her original story, that she had been at Raffaele's all night, and together they discovered a break-in the next day. But the prosecution disputes this account, claiming they can prove the pair were involved in Meredith's murder. They tell the court what they think happened on the night of the 1st of November. Meredith Kercher shared a pizza at a friend's house before leaving for home just before 9 p.m.
Noi sappiamo che Meredith torna a casa sostanzialmente per andare a letto presto.
The prosecution then claimed that shortly after Meredith returned to the cottage, Amanda and Raffaele bumped into Rudy Gede nearby.
L'incontro possa essere stato anche assolutamente casuale.
It's suggested that Amanda let both men into the cottage.
Le carte processuali dicono che ci fu sicuramente un ingresso agevolato perché non ci sono segnali di effrazione sulla porta.
The prosecution then argued that Amanda, Raffaele, and Gede, high on drugs, found Meredith in her bedroom.
Ci sia stato un approccio sessuale, ma probabilmente anche non violento inizialmente da parte di Rudy Gede, da solo o con gli altri.
They say that next, the three tried to involve Meredith in a sexual game, which she rejected. And the prosecution alleges that injuries found on Meredith's body suggest events then took an even more sinister turn.
Perché ci sono tantissime lesioni, piccole lesioni da minaccia, e probabilmente da lì poi è nata una colluttazione. E lì penso che veramente Rudy Gede, con gli altri come io ritengo, abbiano perso un po' la testa, hanno deciso di andare avanti e di mazzare Meredith.
The prosecution points to discrepancies in Amanda and Raffaele's alibis. They say the break-in had been fabricated and call a witness who claims to have seen Amanda and Raffaele near the cottage that night. Most importantly, they present evidence that places the pair at the crime scene with Gede. They say a knife found in Raffaele's kitchen has Amanda's DNA on the handle and Meredith's DNA on the blade. Raffaele's DNA also shows up on a clasp found at the cottage, cut from Meredith's bra. To the jury, the evidence appears overwhelming.
Per quanto riguarda Amanda Knox.
On the 4th of December 2009, after an epic 11-month trial, Amanda Knox and Raffaele Solicito are found guilty of the murder of Meredith Kercher. Amanda is sentenced to 26 years in prison and Raffaele to 25.
Kercher hanno pensato che la verità era stata raggiunta, la giustizia è conseguente alla verità. Ovviamente, secondo la Corte in primo grado, questa era la verità.
But for Raffaele and Amanda's families, the verdict is a shock.
Certainly for the Knoxes, they were going to fight on. It was just beginning.
Back in the United States, public sentiment rallies behind Amanda, believing she is a victim of Italian injustice.
The family hired a U.S. attorney to aid the Italian defense attorneys. They also ramped up the media campaign to try to push and lobby for her innocence, that she was wrongly convicted.
How she is being portrayed and what she does is literally 180 degrees different than who we know our daughter to be.
The defense teams are convinced that Rudy Gede was solely responsible for Meredith's death. And they're skeptical of the DNA evidence that places Amanda and Raffaele at the scene. They say forensic tests were inconclusive and contamination may have occurred during analysis. After nearly a year of lobbying, the Italian authorities grant an appeal. In November 2010, proceedings begin as Amanda and Raffaele seek to overturn their convictions. The press is once again eager to see Amanda Knox, now 23. Her appearance and attitude are totally different.
She was wearing very conservative clothing. She kept her head down. She only spoke and looked around when requested to by the judge. So it was a very different demeanor.
An independent team appointed by the court to review the forensic evidence are called to testify. Their findings are devastating to the prosecution.
So the motive wasn't there. The evidence that Amanda was in the room wasn't there.
They claim that Amanda's DNA could have easily been left on the knife handle while cooking at Raffaele's apartment. And genetic material on the blade, allegedly belonging to Meredith, is too small a quantity to retest. The only DNA linking Raffaele to the crime scene, found on Meredith's bra clasp, is also called into question. It is revealed that the clasp had been collected nearly 7 weeks after the rest of the evidence. Video footage from the crime scene shows the clasp had moved from its original location on the floor. It's also shown being repeatedly handled.
They came to the conclusion that the results were not reliable. Also, the risk of a contamination was very high.
The possibility of forensic errors redirects the focus from the circumstantial evidence which proved so important in the pair's first trial.
They were just looking at the smoking gun. What is the forensic evidence, and does it stand up?
The defense counsel also raises doubts about the prosecution's theory of how Meredith was murdered.
It just didn't seem credible, this sex game gone wrong, the lack of motive, and perhaps questions about whether or not they really had the murder weapon.
In fluent Italian, Amanda makes a final emotional plea to the court.
Sto pagando con la mia vita per cose che non ho commesso.
On the night of the 3rd of October 2011, after nearly 11 months in court, an international audience tunes in for one of the most hotly anticipated verdicts in criminal history. Meredith Kercher's family, who'd had to endure again the horrific details of their daughter's murder, waits in the packed courtroom.
Ordina l'immediata liberazione di Knox, Amanda, Marie e sollecito Raffaele se non detenuti per altra causa.
Amanda and Raffaele are acquitted.
Meredith's mother, Arlene, sister Stephanie, and brother Lyle were all in the courtroom when the verdict was read. And there was silence. They were still, just the sense of sort of, how could this have happened?
After nearly 4 years in prison, Raffaele Sollecito and Amanda Knox are trying to resume normal lives. Rudy Gede, whose sentence was reduced to 16 years on appeal in 2009, remains the only person still serving time for the murder of Meredith Kercher. Continuing to deny that he acted alone, Gede has on occasion implicated both Amanda and Raffaele in recent years, but his accounts of what happened are vague and inconsistent. But with the prosecutor and the Kercher family's legal team convinced that the full story is yet to be told, their fight for justice continues.
Really, for us, it feels very much almost like back to square one.
If it wasn't Amanda and Raffaele, well then, who was it?
Under Italian law, the Kerchers' last chance to find out exactly what happened to Meredith is to take their case to the country's highest judicial level.
Abbiamo molta fiducia nella Corte di Cassazione a Roma per l'ultimo grado di questo processo, perché riteniamo che possa dire ancora qualcosa di importante in questo processo.